Good day. I call this meeting to order. First of all, I would like to welcome you to meeting number 5 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Official Languages. I've seen a few new faces of new members who are replacing other members, and so I also want to wish you a warmest welcome to the Committee on Official Languages. The committee is meeting today because a meeting was requested by 4 members of the committee pursuant to Standing Order 1064 to discuss their request to undertake a study of the government's decision to select We Charity, a unilingual Anglophone organization, to implement the Canada Student Service Grant.
In person, and the proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. So you are aware the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. Pour garantir le bon déroulement de la réunion.
To ensure an orderly meeting, I would like to outline a few rules to follow. First, Occupational Health and Safety have requested that we limit our movement in the room and wear a mask unless seated. Floor markings indicate the path of travel, which goes around the table clockwise, starting at the door. Individuals should respect physical distancing and remain 2 meters from one another, particularly when unmasked. Seats and microphones have been placed in manners which respect physical distancing. Therefore, we ask that they remain in the same place.
You will note that limited personnel has been permitted to attend today. Staff have received a phone number where they can listen in the proceedings in real time. À noter qu'il n'y aura
There are no witnesses today, so there will be no need to have a break between sittings. And you will also notice that no paper documents have been distributed. All documents have been distributed electronically to members. Should you require a copy of the document, please advise the clerk of the committee immediately by emailing the committee. And so before we begin, I would once again like to look at the agenda for the day. And so we're saying, according to Standing Order 1064, this meeting has been requested by 4 members of the committee to discuss the government's decision to select We Charity, a unilingual Anglophone organization, to implement the Canada Student Service Grant, the CSSG. Debate. I am listening. First, Mr. Godin. Thank you, Chairman. It's always a pleasure to see you again, and especially today because it has been a few months since we've seen each other. We haven't seen each other for a chunk of the pandemic, so congratulations to all of my colleagues. I think it's important to acknowledge one another and to share in the hallways our experiences in our ridings, because we have been very present in our ridings over the past months. Mr. Chair, before I go any further, I would like to check with the Assembly if something is possible. Yesterday, I believe an amendment was circulated regarding the motion. And before we begin the debate, I would like to perhaps ask the meeting here today if we can go straight to the notice of meeting pertaining to the main motion, the notice of motion, rather. Well, in fact, it was a motion itself that was submitted and circulated. So what we should do is debate that motion unless there are amendments to that motion. Oh, Mr. Chair, yes, the motion or the amendment that was sent yesterday refers back to the main motion, which was stipulated in the request by the 4 signatories. Could we ask for unanimous consent here today so that we can move straight on to debating the amendment to the motion? Is that in order? Point of order. Mr. Chair, usually when there is a request for meeting by 4 members, we need to start with Standing Order 1064. According to normal procedure, that is where we should start. So I suggest that we start with the request to call the meeting before we continue on to the motion before us. Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Goodeye. Mr. Chair, actually, I would like to pass the floor over to my colleague from Louis Saint Laurent for the main motion. Mr. Deltel, the floor is yours. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm very pleased to see you personally. I would like to congratulate all of my colleagues. Now, regarding the motion before us today. This is for an emergency meeting, and it's the reason why we are here together today, because we believe that this is a situation of emergency. It is urgent to understand and listen to the main actors in this situation. And so I will read the motion that the committee meet and undertake a study of the government's decision to select an Anglophone organization with no presence in Quebec to administer the CSSG, that the Minister of Economic Development and Official Languages, Mélanie Joly, be invited to appear for at least 2 hours before August 21st, that other witnesses include but are not limited to the Honourable Bardish Chagger, the Honourable Pablo Rodriguez, the Honourable Jean-Yves Duclos, National Public Relations We Charity, and the Commissioner of Official Languages, Mr. Raymond Théberge. The reason for this, Mr. Chair, is that all Canadians are concerned that, well, during the pandemic, emergency measures had to be taken, and we understand that. Sometimes action needed to be taken quickly. We understand that. But rules still need to be respected. For 50 years, Canada has officially had 2 official languages. Therefore, all government policies must reflect that. And that is the principal responsibility of the minister. And this is, we are talking about a unilingual Anglophone organization with no presence in Quebec. And the amount of money that was going to be allocated was $912 million. And so that's quite a sum. We believe this is an urgent situation. Why? Because we think we need to talk. The government is soon going to move forward and propose other assistance programs for Canadians. And I want to be clear, we're not against helping Canadians. We are in favor of that. But it must be done while respecting who we are as Canadians and as a country. Since the government acted so quickly in this matter, we need to understand what happened, what were the reasons for the decisions made to stop the same mistakes from being repeated. Therefore, we are trying to help the government to not repeat the same mistakes made. That's why we think that this is an urgent situation, and we want to invite the government to bear witness as part of this debate so they can explain themselves. We want to give the government a chance to explain itself. Thank you, Chair. Thank you. If you would like to intervene, let me know. Mr. Lampropoulos. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Firstly, I completely agree that the organization should have had activities everywhere in Canada and should have carried out the program in both official languages. That is why I'm a bit confused as to why we are here today. Because yes, We Charity, We Charity does have activities in Quebec. It has a presence in Quebec where it had activities with students. I was a teacher before I came to politics. And in my school in Quebec, there were students who were supposed to go to Ecuador as part of a project that We Charity had organized. So it isn't true that We Charity doesn't have a presence in Quebec. The truth is they are present in Quebec. And also, We Montreal is an event that took place in February. That was the last large event for we, and it was in Montreal, and it was completely in French. Not all of the music was in French, but each speaker who made a speech during that event spoke French. So I don't really understand where you are getting your information from when you say that this organization has no presence in Quebec and is unilingual. Thank you. Mr. Beaulieu, I believe that there is an amendment to the motion to be presented. Should I go ahead and present that? I do think that this is an urgent situation. I don't think it's extremely urgent, but what we want is for this to happen between the 24th and the 28th. Between the 24th and 28th. I don't understand. For the Minister Mélanie Joly to come and give a witness account. That's what Mr. Godin was saying. Yes. Okay, so now we are debating Standing Order 1064. And there was no date included? No, there was no date included. It seems to me that We Charity is a unilingual Anglophone organization. In Quebec, they do seem to have an office, but it seems to be closed. We went to knock on the door, and it was closed. And in Toronto and other offices, we telephoned, but it was completely English. There was absolutely no French option. So I don't know We Charity, FCFA, the Francophone and Acadian Communities Federation, doesn't know We Charity. I think it is unacceptable to give a contract to such an organization that doesn't seem to speak French, doesn't seem to really have a network in the Francophonie, whether this be in Quebec or elsewhere in Canada. Thank you. Next up. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Following up on my colleague's remarks, the School Board of Marie-Victorin also participated with We Charity. Over 200 students participated in a program by them in 2018. I can tell you that. So they absolutely do have a presence in Quebec City. And I just wanted to echo what my colleague was saying. Mr. Arsenault, Mr. Chair, I have a lot of trouble with the premise of the motion. I don't want to offend anyone, but first, I'm not from Quebec. Many of us members here are from minority Francophone provinces. But in Quebec, there has been a very superficial look taken at We. I can tell you that this organization does have a presence in Quebec. It has carried out activities. Many youth have been involved with We in Quebec, but I'm not from Quebec. But when I say that I have trouble with the premise of the motion, Mr. Chair, I want to say to Canadians that we are representing the government here in the committee. And the trouble that I have is taking for granted that We has no Francophone presence. It is a bilingual organization with a bilingual website. When I click on the French button, my screen turns to French. The premise really bothers me because having a motion written in this way is to say to Canadians that it has already been determined that We is a unilingual Anglophone organization, and that is what we're saying to Canadians, and I have a lot of trouble with that. Secondly, I think that before we can even study the reason for this motion, we need to know whether or not We is unilingual Anglophone, and this is still in hypothetical waters. But what good does it do to official languages to launch an investigation? Does We have a presence in Quebec or not? All the rest after that is futile until we have established the basis here. So I have a lot of trouble with the premise. And we can come back to this. But those are my comments. Once more, I repeat, we are speaking about this motion, and that is to tell Canadians that we're debating this, whether or not we have already established that we has a presence in Quebec. Thank you, Mr. Arsenault. Mr. Deltel. Mr. Chair, I'm not sure if my colleagues are aware of the events that happened over the past 10 days, because we have learned that the public relations firm, National, was specifically mandated by we without a call for tender. And essentially, this means that it has an impact on francophones in Quebec and elsewhere in Canada. We're not the ones saying this. We was the one who, We Charity, decided itself to mandate a contract out without tender so that National could handle Quebec and the rest of the Francophonie. If we is so bilingual, why did it have to ask National to handle that? My colleague was speaking earlier about an event held in Montreal. Are you speaking about the 3rd of February at the Saint-Denis Theatre? I looked at the speakers. Among others, the Prime Minister was there. Was he paid to do that? How much was he paid? Is that part of the tens of thousands of dollars given to the family? Mr. Chair, point of order. Excuse me, dear colleagues. I'm sorry, but we're here to debate a motion by your colleague, Mr. Godin. I would like to know why we're talking about speakers at that event. Right now, I think it is much more important to stay on the agenda. I just wanted to specify about what my colleague said earlier. I just wanted to remind her that of the speakers she mentioned were the Prime Minister, and we already know about the members of his family. So if we is fundamentally Canadian and has roots in Quebec and looks out to the needs of francophones, why did they go to the public relations firm National? This is what our motion is about. We want to invite people from We Charity to ask them why they gave that mandate to National. Why did National accept the mandate, and what did they do? Mr. Bellavance wrote in La Presse last week, and I would like to have them here in the committee to have people answer our questions. And Mr. Arsenault definitely was right to remind us that Francophonie isn't only in Quebec, it's elsewhere as well.
That's why they subcontracted to a national PR firm to look after the Francophone element. If they were that Canadian, so bilingual and so installed into Quebec, they would have not have needed to hire that PR firm. Thank you, Ms. Lambropoulos. Well, on that point,
firms, PR firms for English Canada. So it's not something that's new to them. They've done it for French Canada and they've done it for English Canada as well. With regards to Monsieur Beaulieu's point, je pense que durant la pandémie, la majorité.
I think during the pandemic, most companies had closed their doors. Even my riding office, the door was closed, so I understand that. But online, the main way people do business these days, the site is completely in French and English. So I think that demonstrates a lot.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you all here today. I've been through a lot of these meetings. And I'd like to begin by hoping that point of orders can remain point of orders, real, true point of orders, and not just interruptions, because that's been the case in the past. There was comments made earlier about a superficial look of the Francophone nature of this organization. And I would agree that there has been a superficial look, although not by the motion, but in fact by the government in their lack of due diligence. Of course, it's just my first day, but anybody can pick up the mandate of this committee that says the Standing Committee on Official Languages shall include, among other matters, the review of and report on official language policies and programs. It would seem like a very basic, generally accepted fact that a national program of this scope and of this nature would fall under a program. And I think the revelations, as was alluded to earlier from my friends down the way, on some of the facts that have come out. I mean, my interest in this particular motion is on the due diligence, the very basic and simple due diligence or lack therefore of. Because, Mr. Chair, I think at the heart of the WE scandal is the position of the opposition, and particularly myself, that that this is a question of whether or not the government did its due diligence in protecting the very basic rights of Francophone Canadians across the country. That's very germane to this mandate. And it has also been noted, Mr. Chair, that in yesterday's committee meeting in ethics, I want to add that the former ethics commissioner, Mary Dawson, in fact, stated that ancillary discussions or investigations, in fact, help put on the public record for the ethics commissioner additional information that could be germane to their investigation. So I do believe that in the format of this committee and its mandate, that this particular aspect of, protecting the rights of Francophone Canadians is germane to the investigation. And it is certainly, about defending the rights of both official languages. In fact, I'm surprised there's even really this much of a robust discussion about it, because that's the mandate of this committee. And again, to reiterate, the fact that the National Public Relations was called in at such a time leads me to call into question the authenticity of the claim that there was proper due diligence done. Because I can share with you in my past work, Mr. Chair, both as a city councillor, somebody who sat on the Hamilton Community Foundation, somebody who, distributed funds through our enrichment program, that if a program came purporting to represent both official languages, if you tried to apply for the Trillium grant or something of that nature, due diligence would be put in place to ensure that was actually the fact. And it would be it would be part of their request for qualifications in the initial application. And I just have a hard time believing that that was the case. And if that is not the case, then that again begs the question around the political nature or interference into the awarding of this contract, or for lack of a better term, the term that's being used, contribution agreement. So, I'm very keen to see if that is the case, and very keen to see if some of the due diligence shortfalls may also fall into Section 18 of the conflict of interest, which is the anti-avoidance clause. So is in the hiring of national public relations part of the avoidance of even getting to qualify for a program of this size and scope. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Green. La parole est à Monsieur Gaudin.
The floor is now Mr. Godin's. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm surprised to see the questions being asked across the floor. The committee has a responsibility to be vigilant about respect for official languages in the exercise of Parliament and all its branches. Many questions have been raised. Across the way, they're saying that We Charity is bilingual. We have questions about that, because why did they need National Public Relations firm to have French representation of the French language for Quebecers and non-Quebec Francophones? Those are the questions that need to be answered, and this study will allow us to obtain those answers. So I think we should not have any problem with the premise of our motion and say that it's poorly presented. On the contrary, the fact is that We Charity obtained a contract. Supposedly, it was the only organization that could provide the service in a country with two official languages. And they noted Perhaps the party across the way didn't note that they aren't bilingual, but they were wise enough to say, we don't have enough capacity in French, so we're going to give somebody else the contract to handle that. But that somebody else might have had the capacity to service coast to coast in French and English. If National PR firm could do it, probably others could too. So, what did the minister do to protect one of the two official languages, that is French, in awarding a government contract, this contribution agreement? So I think that's perfectly legitimate on the part of this committee, because you have to remember, Mr. Chairman, that this will allow us to table recommendations. We're in a pandemic context. Some of it's over, but we don't know how long it's going to take. There will be other programs, and I hope that the government in place is designing more programs to help Canadians. But there may be similar situations in other programs, and our objective is to protect both official languages. And in this case, it's French. In another case, it could be English. The number of francophones of Canada is lesser than the number of anglophones, so that's why there's an Official Languages Act. So, Mr. Chairman, I think this is perfectly pertinent. We have to act quickly to get tools as a committee to come up with recommendations as quickly as possible to protect the interests of both francophones and anglophones. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Godin. Mr. Généreux, your turn. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I just want to remind all members of the committee that the minister, Madame Joly, mentioned on many occasions, even in the House, that the committee has a mandate for this. We've done this many times in the past few years. We've taken the decision to conduct a study. If you don't like the premise of the motion, I'd like to ask Mr. Arsenault whether he has a proposal, because I understand the premise bothers him. Perhaps we could change that, but the idea is not to judge the motion itself, the way it's written. It's to bring forward all the players here to get answers to the questions raised by this controversy about We Charity. We want to ask them things. They can come here and prove that they are bilingual and they can offer services in French and English across the country. It's not just a website you need to do that. So what I'm suggesting to Mr. Arsenault is, do you have a different premise? Do you want to propose something else? I can be open to an amendment to change the premise of the motion, but the idea is for the committee, independent as it is, should be able to go forward and come to a vote and do this study. Conduct the study starting next week or in the dates that Mr. Beaulieu mentioned. That's not a problem. Thank you, Mr. Généreux.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Like my colleague said, I support this motion. I think it's very important for this committee to study this issue. This is an emergency issue.
Maintain two things throughout this whole we issue, Mr. Chair. The first is that, the bureaucrats recommended that the government proceed in delivering this program through the We Charity, and that the government, the Liberal cabinet, simply were passive bystanders in this recommendation and simply accepted the bureaucrats' recommendation. Initially when this whole issue came up, Minister Ng's office, for example, said that she had not met with the We Charity. It later came to light that she met with them on April 7th. Minister Chagger initially said that she had no conversations with the We organization, and then it later came to light that she did speak with them on April 17th. In fact, I think that came to light yesterday. The We organization initially delivered a proposal to the government on April 9th, well ahead of the cabinet meeting that took place later in May, a month and a half later. And then we find out that Minister Monroe's office contacted we to rework the application, clearly working with them quite closely in order to produce this memorandum to cabinet and a proposal from the WE organization. So this has all come to light that runs contrary to the government's assertion that it simply accepted the government's, the bureaucrats' recommendation. And then the second thing the government has maintained throughout all of this is that the WE Charity was the only organization in this country, including the largest employer in this country, the Government of Canada, the Public Service, the only organization capable of delivering this program. But then we find out in recent days that they couldn't deliver it to a quarter of this country's population, to the 25% of Canadians whose first mother tongue official language spoken is French. And so I think this committee should be seized with this issue. I've sat on this committee for a number of years, and I can tell you, Mr. Chair, that we have been seized with issues far, far smaller than this. This is a billion-dollar program that was being proposed that would affect Canadians from coast to coast, 25% of whom who speak French as a first language. This program is of the scale of the roadmap for official languages that we've had ever since Monsieur Dion proposed the first one, le plan d'action de Monsieur Dion, some 15 years ago. That action plan was $1 billion. And we spent, I think, easily dozens and dozens, if not 100 meetings studying those plans and coming up with reports on how to improve the next 5-year action plan on official languages. Surely we can spend a few meetings looking at the impact of on official language minority communities and official language communities of $1 billion program that was to be delivered by an organization who couldn't deliver it to a quarter of this country's population. So for those reasons, Mr. Chair, I hope the committee supports the motion and that we get some expeditious hearings on this in order to ensure that we protect French language minority rights in this country. Look, it's at times of crisis that our institutions are tested, and they either endure that test and come out stronger and strengthened because of it, or they crumble. You know, we've already had incidences during this pandemic where official language communities are not being respected. We've had an issue where Health Canada waived Francophone French language requirements for health devices, may be excusable because of the pandemic. But we have a responsibility as a committee to protect French language, minority rights, and majority rights in this country, as we do for other linguistic official language minority communities in Canada. So I hope this committee supports this motion. Thank you.
So thank you, Mr. Chung. Maintenant, la parole est à Monsieur Arsenault.
Now it's Chairman of Mr. Arsenault. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very touched by the sensitivity of the Conservative Party for the official languages. It's too bad that none of their leader candidates can speak French well, but anyway. To get back to what my colleague Mr. Godin was saying and Mr. Deltel was saying, I never personally said that WE Charity was perfectly bilingual. I never said that. I never used those words. But what I'm saying is that if we were to learn through WE's testimony that this organization can serve all Canadians in French and English, fine. Is it perfectly bilingual, a little bit bilingual? We don't know. That's the premise of the motion. But if we were to determine that indeed the organization can serve Canadians in both languages, if they had hypothetically continued with the contract, the rest of the motion is completely non-credible. So I don't accept that premise. Can we serve Canadians in both languages? I don't know the answer to that. That's what we have to determine first. If it comes to pass that they can do that, the rest of the motion makes no sense. So let me grab the ball that my colleague, Mr. Généreux, offered. Not a generous colleague, but my colleague Bernard Généreux. I'm asking the question, shouldn't the Official Languages Committee be concerned, or at least study, the way services to third parties, regardless of what it is? How do we make sure these services are bilingual? How do we make sure these services are provided bilingually? I have no idea how this is done. I've been here 5 years. My colleague, Mr. Généreux, has been here 5 years too. We've studied all kinds of reports. We've produced reports, but we've never done this. So why not grab the ball here and ask the right questions, regardless of who is involved? That's what the Official Languages Committee should do. And Mr. Chong, I'd say that I'm a linguistic minority in Canada, and I am very interested in protecting the Francophones in Canada, Francophiles and allophones who learn French. That's not the issue. The question is, we're taking it for granted that this is true when we don't know, in order to put questions to ministers. That is the reality. Let's be Cartesian here. If we really want to do that, what's the point of determining whether we can offer services in French and English, not doing this contract anymore? So let's make this motion a winning motion for the Canadian government, for the Official Languages Committee, and let's study how we make sure that official languages are respected when the Government of Canada delegates its powers to a third party, another organization, to deliver services on behalf of the government. That's the question I'd ask. Thank you, Mr. Arsenault. The next questioner will be Ms. Lambropoulos. Thank you. I just wanted to make a comment here.
You know, my colleagues' comments across the way earlier. All of the issues that were mentioned by Mr. Chong are already being studied by 3 different committees, and that's not why we're here today. Today we're here because we are trying to make sure that organizations service people in both English and French and Canadians across the country. And the reason why I have a problem with the motion, again, just like my colleague said, I don't think it's true. We're basing it on an assumption that it is not present in Quebec and that it is only offered to Anglophone English speakers. I personally worked in a school in Quebec where my students benefited from WE. So I cannot sit here and say that this isn't a lie or that it is not a false assumption, because I have firsthand experience with this organization in my school in Quebec. I don't understand how much clearer I can get on that. There are 400 schools in Quebec that are with WE and that have somehow taken advantage of programs offered by WE. And there are 948 teachers in Quebec that have worked with WE and have worked with their students in leadership to bring their kids to countries to build wells and to help with international development. So I have a problem with that. If every single person watching this committee today and every single person on this committee can go on WE's Facebook page, Uni, and they can see a 3-hour-long conference taking place in French for French speakers, for Montreal French youth. These are the people who are benefiting from this organization. 115,000 young people in Quebec benefit from WE, whether they are French or English. And not one English person at that conference would have understood what was being said because it was all in French. So that's fine. You know, they're across the country. They offer services in both languages. But we cannot sit here and put a motion forward or vote on a motion that is a literal lie. And in my view, it is, because I know the facts.
Merci, Madame Lambropoulos.
Thank you. Mr. Lambropoulos, if you want to intervene, please raise your hand. Yes, right now on the list, I have Mr. Beaulieu, Mrs. Latanzio, Mr. Lalonde, Mr. Baudin. So, Mrs. Latanzio. Thank you. Thank you, and it's a pleasure for me to see you, dear colleagues. I would like to clarify some points that were set forth by my colleagues. First of all, Mr. Beaulieu, with regards to the headquarters of We, a charity in Montreal, Quebec. It's on St. Hubert Street, and by doing a very perfunctory search, you can see that the headquarters is still there. This company, or this business, still exists and continues its operations. And perhaps when you chose to go knock on a door, they didn't answer because, as my colleague on the other side was saying, many of us, even with our riding offices, we don't answer the door and the door is locked. So to my knowledge, I know that this business is still headquartered as described on the We Charity website on St. Hubert Street. Now, before answering to the interventions of my colleague Green, I would like to say that
not only false, but also we should raise the argument that if we follow this logic, then an organization that is only headquartered in Quebec could never run any national program, no matter what and who they partner with. And that, being a Quebecer, would sadden me, to say the least. And with regards to the question of due diligence raised by my colleague Matthew Green, related to the language, it would not be the ministers that would want to answer these questions with regards to due diligence, but actually the staff on the ESDC, because we have a contract. I dug up the contract, and I have it here before me, and I don't know if my colleagues took the pain of looking up the contract, but the contract is both in French and in English, and I have both copies here. And I'm going to draw your attention to section 37 of that contract, l'article 37, qui dit bel et bien.
And it says,
37.1, where the project is to be delivered to members of either language community, the recipient shall A, make project-related documentation and announcements for the public and prospective project participants, if any, in both official languages where applicable. B, actively offer and provide in both official languages any project-related services to be provided or made available to members of the public where applicable, and C, organize activities and provide its services where appropriate in such manner as to address the needs of both official language communities. It is in black and white. It is crystal clear. The contract that was signed, both participants knew full well that the services that needed to be delivered needed to be in French and in English. More so, I draw your attention to what were some of the activities that needed to be done in both official languages. And I'm going to give you, like they say in French, un survol. And we can find some of those activities or some of those projects that needed to be done in both languages throughout the contract, and more specifically in clauses that pertain to such activities. And forgive me 2 minutes. I'm going to draw your attention to some of those. I don't mean to be wasting anybody's time, Mr. President, but I just want to be thorough. And they appear in the Annex A. I have it. Wait. So when we look at the activities Annex A, we see that the specific objectives of the project are to, 1, place up to 40,000 students in We Volunteer Service opportunities across Canada, including those from vulnerable and unrepresented groups and official language minority communities through the I Want to Help platform. Ongoing from May to September 2020, validate and post volunteer service opportunities in bilingual format from non-for-profits partners and other non-for-profits through web-based input module and electronic feed to EDC's I Want to Help platform. Provide bilingual supports to nonprofit partners to ensure that they have the capacity to train and safely onboard volunteers to We Services opportunities. Provide bilingual supports, youth skills training, and COVID-19 training to volunteers in We Service opportunities. And we can go on and on. We have June 2020 launch a bilingual online WE platform to register and intake volunteers for WE opportunities. So to say here in this committee, or to have a premise that when this contract was contracted, that no due diligence was made with regards to ensuring that the programs, the projects would have been done in both official languages is, I think, very far from the truth. I think that there was documents that were legally binding to such an effect. And if we're going to have that conversation here in this committee, I think that we need to move beyond the scope of just this organization, but make it broader, as my colleague Arsenault has mentioned. And I think, and I welcome the extension of the olive branch from our colleague Généreux, because I think the mandate of this committee is to ensure that it be this organization or any organizations that contracts with the government, is to ensure that both French and English language minorities receive the services that they so deserve. Thank you.
Merci, Madame Latanzio.
Thank you, Mrs. Latanzio. Mr. Beaulieu now. Well, I don't want to go too deep into the content, but to clarify, I think yesterday someone went to this office. It was yesterday. There was no answer. There was a gentleman who said he was the owner of the building and said that the organization had broken their rental agreement and they were going to shut off the electricity. I mean, we can check, but this is the information that we had. And it's not that they closed the door so that people could work from home. No, it was that they broke the rental agreement. And so we can check further and see what's going on with the Montreal headquarters. Now, if We Charity hired communications firms, English communications firms, I don't think it was to help them to communicate in English or because they have trouble with the English language. In the case of National, it seems that it was explicitly to help them to reach Francophones. And a lot of liberals seem to be really close with We Charity, but I've asked around and nobody had heard speak of the We Charity in my entourage, so their network seems quite limited. So I think that this is an important example, and we saw this. There are quite a few indications, but the issue of labeling of products. In the beginning, we considered it wasn't important that the Francophones be able to read safety information on health products. There were all kinds of measures that were easy and were taken. The government revised their position, but it would have been easier to require businesses to order products and that they label them in French once the products were in Canada. There are all kinds of ways of doing this. There are many examples that demonstrate that this is a superficial type of bilingualism, and sometimes services are inadequate. We saw this at DFO recently. They weren't sending out the call for tenders, all the call for tenders in French, and we can cite other examples where government organizations themselves are not respecting the Official Languages Act. So I think this is a good example, and it allows us to delve into the issue further to see what measures were taken. And we can generalize then, and we can speak to the measures that are taken to make sure that programs are always accessible in French. And if there was an amendment to be made, well, I'm not going to make it, but it would simply be to add. But I think it's important to delve further, to go to the heart of the issue and to see if, okay, We Charity is one thing. To be able to organize events or to have a conference in French, it's a totally different thing to have people who can answer in French within the organization itself and who can provide services in French and not just one single conference at one set point in time. Thank you, Mr. Beaulieu. Mrs. Lalonde. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I really appreciate the conversation. And I really did appreciate what my colleague said with regards to the contract that was signed, with regards to the federal government's commitment. And the obligations with regards to the official languages agreement. If you remember my past, provincially, you know that the importance of bilingualism in Canada, and more specifically outside of Quebec. I'd like to raise. Well, I think someone talked about running with the ball, and so perhaps to try to begin a conversation in order to add to the original Conservative motion. So if you'll add me, Mr. Chair, I would like to propose an amendment to the original motion made by my colleague Godin, and I have a lot of respect for my colleague. And perhaps this will also respond to Mr. Green's concerns. We didn't talk a lot because of COVID. I'm new to the federal government, but I'm going to read this in both official languages. And Madam Clerk, I do have copies that I can distribute. Thank you. Might I read this amendment? We would add to the motion, and we would like to add a context to the motion of Mr. Godin, that the motion would begin with this, that the committee wants to make sure that the necessary checks and contractual obligations are sufficient to make sure that all subcontracting or services of the federal government require delivery of programs in both official languages at the same level as if the government had to provide the services, that the committee study the language requirements associated with the outsourcing of federal government responsibilities and hold at least 4 meetings on the subject and hear from relevant witnesses and report back to the House on the issue. I would like to begin with this amendment. Oh, do you want me to read this in the other language? One moment. I just want to make sure that everything is in order.
Il s'ajoute.
On ajoute.
This is the preamble. We would begin with this. Mr. Chair, I would like to tell Mrs. Lalonde. So we begin with this preamble, and then our motion is word for word? Is that it? Yes. As presented, yes. The amendment is in order, but I see many hands. Mrs. Lalonde, I would ask you not only to read the amendment and to say exactly where this will be placed in the 1064 in the motion. And this will allow, hang on. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I apologize to my colleagues. So the original motion would begin with this amendment, and the rest.
Tout le reste s'en suivrait. Mais moi, je propose dans le contexte qu'on...
I'm suggesting that we talk about diligence here. And when we talk about the importance of seeing how the government is dealing with official languages. We spoke about the importance of bilingualism in Canada and the importance, even here that we spoke about Section 37, I think that this committee should look at the issue in a more broader way. Thank you. I have Mr. Godin first, Mr. Green, and then Mr. Lambopoulos. So the discussion now will be on the amendment. Well, my intervention was supposed to be before. I had asked to speak before. No. Sorry. I check, and I'm careful. Yes, but you mentioned my name when there were 4 people. I was after Mrs. Lalonde. You mentioned this. I'm not trying to contradict the chair, but my intervention, well, hang on. I'm surprised now. I can't comment on this before having looked at what Mrs. Lalonde has presented. No, I don't want to speak on this right now. Yeah, but that's the process. I would like to ensure that the way that in the order of the hands, I agree on the order, but I can't speak to the amendment. I had asked to speak before the amendment was tabled. Outside of the amendment, something other than the amendment. Mr. Godin, well, according to the rules of procedure, once the amendment is tabled, we have no choice. We have to speak to the amendment. Okay. Well, I'm going to listen to what you're saying, but I did ask to speak before. But, Mr. Chair, I'd like to come back on the objective of colleague Arsenault. We agree. We agree in the sense that we do have to assess the process and contract attribution with third parties. We already have an obligation within the Act. Now, in the application, we have the same objective, and we're taking a different road, and we're not coming from the same place. Now, I share what my colleague's point of view, but I don't want us to put We Charity on trial. That's not what we're doing. But we need to use this situation to urgently question ourselves and to provide ourselves with the necessary tools to maximize the impact of the protection of both official languages. I find that it's interesting that we're doing this today, following yesterday the Quebec French language office is concerned for the French language, and even the Premier of Quebec spoke to this yesterday during a press conference. Yesterday, at a press conference, he said he was concerned with results. So what I was going to do was I was going to present an amendment, but Mrs. Lalonde has presented another amendment, and I haven't really looked at this yet, but I'm prepared to table another amendment myself. Unfortunately, Mr. Godin, we need to continue the discussion on this particular amendment, and we need to deal with this amendment before dealing with another. Well, Mr. Chair, thank you, and I will come back to this later on. Thank you, Mr. Godin, and I appreciate.
Mr. Green has the floor.
Mr. Chair, if I knew when it was this much fun, I would have been here way earlier in the term here. But I did want to have the opportunity to respond to the amendment because there's some really interesting language that's being used both by the mover of the amendment and by previous speakers from the government side, and that's this language around a contract. I would argue that had this been an official contract, due diligence would have been in place where we wouldn't be in this situation in the first place, but that's not what happened. So let's be very clear about what happened. What happened was, as has been touted, there was a contribution agreement made that circumvented a lot of the basic practices and principles that have led to not just the language issue, but a myriad of ethical issues that are both call into question the Conflict of Interest Act, call into question gifts, call into question all sorts of improprieties around this particular deal. It was suggested that ministers, in fact, don't have to look at or do due diligence around this. That is, again, not to be the case. It is true that in testimony, Minister Chagar was very clear about what the due diligence was done on the file and what wasn't.
Monsieur le Président, j'ai un point d'ordre.
Let's make sure it's a point of order, though, because I've sat through 4 meetings of this. Then please name the point of order.
Okay.
Point of order, Madame Latanzio.
Thank you, Mr. President and Mr. Chair. Point of order is quite simple. We're making all kinds of assumption here.
That's
with
not a point
regards
of order,
to-
that's debate.
No, that's not a debate. You're bringing in what's happening in other committees with regards to
That's debate.
testimony that are being rendered at different levels
debate.
and conflict
Madame
of interest.
Latanzio,
It
je
is-
lawyer, you should know better.
m'excuse,
You guys did this in
c'est
ethics,
pas... Donc, je vous retourne la parole à Monsieur Green. Là.
I'm going to turn the floor back over to Mr. Green, but we're assuming things.
I've been on the Hill, for 6 months, former city councilor. I know the basic rules of order. And to use it as an attempt to continue to disrupt my democratic right to be at this table, that's also, you can't just continue to disrupt
I have a
people.
point of privilege. I have a point of privilege.
Point de privilège,
We
Madame
don't know each
Latanzio.
Point of privilege.
I was and I know and I whatever. I'm a former city councilor myself, a school board trustee.
That's also not a point of privilege.
So
I
yes,
didn't
it is
name
because
anybody.
you are
That's
saying
not a point of privilege.
You are saying that I don't know what the rules are,
That's
and that
not a
is
point of
my
privilege.
point of privilege.
I didn't
to tell
name
you
anybody.
No.
that I've also
These are
said and I know the
tactics.
No,
rules.
please, s'il vous plaît, Madame Latanzio.
Please, Miss Latanzio had the floor.
Mr. Green.
Thank you. Now, to go back to the point at hand, because this is what has been happening, as my experience. I can speak to my experience, by the way, as a member of parliament. I have a right to sit at this table. I have a right to sit at this table and debate in real and in good faith ways, and that's what I'd like to do here today. Going back to this language of contract that has been used repeatedly by members from the government side, that's not what happened. We know that to not be what happened because that's the whole thrust of their defense against this scandal, is that it was a contribution agreement and therefore outside of the parameters of typical contracts and typical due diligence. I would argue through you, Mr. Chair, to the mover of the amendment and to folks around this committee, that there's been a quarter of the public service on furlough. That the sole source contracting, if we can use that language of contract, is in fact the privatization of public services. That we have thousands of members of the public service ready and willing to deliver this, just like they did CERB, just like they did the wage subsidy, just like they did the rental subsidy. Well, that's another story for another day, I suppose. So, to suggest somehow that the contract that was put forward, the annexations, all these other things, I think Minister Qualtrough was quite clear in her testimony that she had nothing to do with this. And Minister Chargar was quite clear in her testimony that there were gaps in the due diligence. And, when we talk about due diligence, and this is germane to the difference between a contract and a contribution agreement, which is germane, again, to the amendment, that we had the clerk of the Privy Council admit in committee that there was specifics he didn't know about. We had the chief of staff, Katie Telford, in committee, in the finance committee, testify that she didn't even know the contract was to the We Charity Foundation. Basic levels of due diligence have not been met on this file. This is just another one of those instances. I won't be supporting the amendment, and I hope, Mr. Chair, that if we're going to, proceed, and if I'm going to be in this committee in these ways, that maybe we can have presented to the committee a list of the applicable points of order and a list of the applicable points of personal privilege, just to make sure that we're all, debating around the same terms.
Merci. Donc là, j'ai deux personnes sur la liste.
Thank you. Now I have two people on the list, Ms. Lambropoulos and Mr. Godin. Go ahead, Ms. Lambropoulos.
This was going to be my point, but I'll say it anyways. Mon collègue, Monsieur Beaulieu, avait dit que dans son entourage, in his surroundings, not too many people have heard of We. And allow me just to, throw it out there that We
Point
really
of order,
does.
Monsieur le Président.
Monsieur Gaudin, oui.
Monsieur le
Point
Président,
d'ordre.
Go ahead, Mr. Godin. You asked me, Mr. Chair, to speak about the amendment of Ms. Lalonde. Yes, Mr. Godin, but this is a vast conversation. Mr. Green made reference to all sorts of names. I do believe that, Ms. Lambropoulos, you can go ahead. Ms. Lambropoulos.
as a teacher. That's why I know them, not because I'm an Anglophone, but because I'm a teacher. And I have a lot of younger friends. I'm also one of the younger members of Parliament, so it's not too far from my generation, to be honest with you. That's why I have a better knowledge of this organization. And it seemed like he was suggesting that even though Anglophones know of We in Quebec, Francophones don't know of it, which I don't think is the case, because there are way too many schools that are currently involved with, or that have been involved with We. Then that would, like, it wouldn't make sense for that to be the case. But even so, what are we saying? I mean, we are on the Official Languages Committee. Our mandate is to protect the official languages in Quebec and in the rest of Canada. Saying that Anglophone Quebecers may know about We, but that it's not considered to be present in Quebec, I personally have a problem with that as an Anglophone Quebecer. I think that it's wrong to say that it's not part of Quebec. It completely ignores the community of Anglophone Quebec, of English-speaking Quebec. And I understand the importance of it being in French. And once again, that's why I was happy that most of the conference was in French. But to say that it's not considered to be in Quebec just because a lot of French-speaking people seem not to know about it, I feel is going a little far, and it's a bit of an insult to the English-speaking community. And I don't think that the current wording of I know I'm talking about the motion, the original motion at this point, but I don't think it is representative of the reality.
Merci. La parole à Monsieur Gaudin.
Thank you. The floor is yours, Mr. Godin. Mr. Chair, I will be very brief. I will be speaking to the motion, of course, which was, I will be speaking about what my colleague Lalonde said. Some things she said were very laudable, and I agree with them. But I cannot vote for the amendment because there's a contradiction. In the last paragraph, it asks for witnesses to appear, and we're asking for something to be added to the original motion. Let's look at the part about Minister Mélanie Joly, who should be invited to appear for at least 2 hours. You know my position on the upcoming vote. I cannot support it. Thank you, Mr. Godin. Now, Mr. Chong. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Amendment either. Appreciate the member bringing it forward, but I think it doesn't really add to the original motion. Now, I fully acknowledge the original motion's not perfectly worded. Very few motions are, but I think we should stick with the original motion and proceed on that basis. Look, here's why I think this committee should be seized with this issue and proceed with a study of a few meetings of this issue. Parliament has essentially been suspended since March the 13th. When it has met for a few brief minutes before it then goes into a special committee or committee of the whole. And in those special committees, Parliament, the House of Commons is not sitting. It's the special committee or the committee of the whole that's sitting, which has virtually no power. It has simply the power for members to ask statements, ask questions, for members to give statements, and for members to present petitions. The usual powers of Parliament to present motions, to introduce bills, to hold the government accountable simply aren't there. So this committee, though, is an opportunity for us to hold the government accountable on this important issue. And yes, it's only a small slice, $1 billion slice of a $231 billion stimulus package. But the fact of the matter is that the government has been operating under extraordinary emergency powers granted to it on March 13th of this year. And we have a job to do as parliamentarians on this committee to make sure that a portion of that money is being spent in the proper manner. And in this case, responsibility to look at exactly what happened to ensure that the other monies that are actually going out the door are being properly spent. The money actually hasn't been fully returned as of the latest news that I've read. 30 million was transferred to the WE organization. As of the last news I read, 22 million has been sent back. Some 8 million is still waiting to be sent back. The heart of the matter is this. The government has maintained from day one that the WE organization was the only organization in the entire country, including the federal public service, some 250,000 strong, that could deliver this program. But increasingly, it looks like that that's a falsehood. Increasingly, it looks like that that's not the case. They clearly couldn't deliver it to official French language communities in Quebec and official French language minority communities outside the province of Quebec. That's why they had to enter into a contract and hire a lobbying group to do that. And so it calls into question why this contract was let in the first place. It was signed on June 23rd and backdated to May 5th, even before the federal cabinet had considered it. And so we need to know why that was the case, because it doesn't look like the government's story is holding up. It doesn't look like they had nothing to do with this. This was all to do with the federal bureaucracy who recommended this. They weren't involved in the early stages of helping to draft the proposal. They weren't at all involved with creating this program and rapidly structuring in a way so that the WE charity would get this program. And it's not, and it doesn't hold up that they were the WE charity was the only organization able to deliver this. And so it calls into question why this whole thing came to be. And increasingly, to me, it looks like the Liberal government, particularly Liberal ministers, were just out to help their friends and supporters out there, using the cover of a pandemic and the extraordinary emergency powers that they have to do this. And we cannot, as a committee, let the government get away with this. We have a responsibility not just to the people who pay tax in this country, but to the broader public to ensure that there's good governance in this country and to ensure that we get to the bottom of this and hold the government accountable on this. And that's why I think we should have a few meetings on this, why we shouldn't accept this amendment and water down this motion, and get to the bottom of this to ensure that we understand exactly why this contract was given to the WE organization and understand exactly why that was done despite the fact they couldn't deliver it to 25% of this country, some 9 million Canadians whose first official language is French. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci, Monsieur Chong. Monsieur Beaulieu, à vous la parole.
Mr. Beaulieu, over to you. I would just like to rectify some facts. Ms. Lambropoulos, I didn't say that Anglophones know WE charity. I said the Liberals know WE charity. She seems to have flipped that. That is not what I said. Also, I would like to say that I believe that in the initial proposal, there was a huge concern regarding the government's respect of official languages. I think that we need to go into a deep study of this, and so I will not support the amendment either. The floor is yours, Ms. Lalonde. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Firstly, I would like to clarify something.
Looking, and as some of my colleagues we've met in the last month, the issue about WE and several ministers have attended, and actually the Prime Minister of Canada did speak about that. And fundamentally, when I look at my writing, the great writing of Orleans, the best writing, la plus belle circonscription du Canada.
The most beautiful writing in all of Canada. I would just like to say that when people call us up at our office, well, what do we talk about? We talk about companies. Companies in a precarious situation because of this pandemic. That's the truth still today. You can look around this table and see that we're not sitting close together. We're 2 meters apart. We're wearing masks. And outside the walls of this beautiful room, there are other people. And I know that people in my riding of Orléans are talking.
It's going to be safe at school. They also talk about the fact that is my business with the wage subsidy. And I was so happy to see that the government actually extended. And we've had this collaboration. Ce comité est censé de regarder.
This committee is supposed to look into the importance of official languages. And some of my colleagues have been here for years. And it took so much hard work to even get support from everyone to ensure that the next national census gets the information, the data that we really need on this committee.
With this amendment. And I don't know if it's just because it's an amendment by a Liberal that we feel threatened, but I just want to say to all of you, actually, the amendment would examine the fee around the due diligence. This amendment would ensure that both the due diligence and the contractual obligation is sufficient to ensure the protection. And I have to say to my members here and to the rest of Canada, sadly, kids across Canada, les jeunes à travers le Canada ne verront jamais ce programme.
That kids in Canada will never see that program because we, Charity, pulled out of its contractual obligations.
Under amendment is to actually bring the context that I think our conservative colleagues are trying to make, which is the importance of French language, of official language, I should say, inside any contract that the Government of Canada signs. Donc, je vais le lire en anglais. That the committee wishes to ensure that both the due diligence and contractual obligation are sufficient to ensure that any outsourcing of federal government program or service requires delivery of programs in both official languages to the same levels as if the government had delivered the program and services itself. Et on le sait, mes chers collègues, que plusieurs fois au fil des années.
And dear colleagues, we know that in the past, many times, the federal government has had to give out contracts and has had to come to our committee to make sure that the contract was respectful.
With the outsourcing of federal government responsibility and on at least 4 meetings. So I thought I was very candid in saying 4 on the subject and hear more relevant witnesses. And I hear the comments from the witnesses. Well, you've listed some of them. I always believe that witnesses should be discussed in subcommittee, but from relevant and report back to the House on this issue. Donc, j'aimerais que mes collègues reconsidèrent leur position, à savoir qu'on veut bonifier la proposition.
I would like to hear my colleagues on this. I think that this amendment improves the motion, colleagues, and Mr. Godin, and I would like to ask you again for your support.
Romanado.
I have 2 people on the list, Mr. Arsenault, Ms. Romanado. Mr. Arsenault. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's a bit of a detour here to comment on what our colleague Mr. Chong shared. He talked about ethics, he talked about worries about conflict of interest, finance, public money. I have no problem discussing those things in a context other than official languages. There are other committees that have that mandate, and they do it very capably, particularly with the WE affair. The mandate of official languages is the application, the respect of language rights in Canada. That's the mandate of this committee. And the amendment proposed by my colleague is exactly what that does. We can start with the premise that there were some concerns about WE's ability to operate bilingually. But it's in vain to stop at that. What would the point be then? If we start from the principle that the WE affair has called into question it giving contracts to certain companies or organizations, we have to make sure it's respected across the country, not just for one event and one organization. That's within our mandate. That doesn't prevent any colleague around the table from asking questions to the minister or we or anybody else. We're grabbing the ball, we're looking at this doubt that was that arose, and looking at what's relevant within the mandate of the committee. Mr. Chong, I want to correct what you said earlier. Maybe Mr. Généreux can correct me, but whenever we have motions here, we've had amendments from all sides of the table unanimously, and almost all, virtually all the reports we've published in the last 5 years were unanimous. So we come up with good motions here at this committee. We're not doing anything partisan. If that's the concern, well, how do we make sure that under the umbrella of official languages, third parties that get service contracts from the Government of Canada and have to speak on behalf of the government to Canadians, how do we make sure those organizations respect the linguistic obligations of this country? That's what's on the table. That's the amendment proposed by my colleague. And in subcommittee, we can see whether we want other witnesses than those proposed or if we just want these. But we decided that we'd created a subcommittee to discuss the list of witnesses. We can do that later. We can limit ourselves to these. But one doesn't stop the other. So I'm wondering, on behalf of taxpayers, what would be the point of the motion as tabled by the opposition, the Conservatives? What's the point of it? It's a contract that no longer exists. But we should take up the problem, the question that arose about the capacity for bilingualism. That's within the mandate of this committee. And Mr. Chong and I have been here at least 5 years. Thank you, Mr. Arsenault. I have Ms. Romanado who wants to speak. Go ahead.
Thank you. And my colleague, Mr. Arsenault, kind of stole some of my thunder there. But I wanted to get back to the focus that we have an amendment in front of us, and that's what the focus of the conversation is on. And I'm subbing in, and so having one of the nicest ridings in Canada that actually has a borough in it that has bilingual status, which I'm really happy about. So I make sure that my riding provides services in both official languages because we're about service. And so the point of this amendment, I think, captures a lot of what we're hearing today. We're all saying the same thing. We're all saying that it is incredibly important that Canadians be served in the language of their choice of the two official languages. And I think this actually encompasses that. There's concerns whether it be a contract that has the capacity to provide services in French, or if it's a contract to be able to provide services in English. And I think it's really important that if we're going to do this as a committee, and we want to take seriously official languages and the importance of supporting both official languages, that I think this amendment captures that. And I like the idea that we've put in there for meetings, but maybe that's something that, there's debatable on how many we need. But I think we're all in agreement. And I think that was where I was hoping to get to, is the mandate of this committee and the amendment in front of us is to talk about the importance of supporting both official languages and making sure that we do everything in our power to support those two official languages. So, and I know that my colleague, Mr. Beaulieu, brought it up earlier about, whether or not there was, I think it was French writing on warnings or something on one of the packaging. Well, I remember in Quebec, in my riding, in the middle of the pandemic, at the worst part of the pandemic, my Anglophone community did not get any information from the Quebec government. It was only unilingually in French. It took us a couple of weeks before we got the notices in English. So if we're going to talk about providing services to Canadians and supporting both official languages, I think this is an absolutely nonpartisan way to have Mr. Godin's motion before us with an amendment to say, if we're going to look at it, let's look at it. Let's do it right. Thank you.
Merci, Madame Romanado.
Thank you, Ms. Romanado. The last person is Ms. Latanzio, who wants to intervene.
Monsieur le Président, sur l'amendement de ma collègue.
I'm asking for a vote on the amendment, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Ms. Latanzio. The debate is still open. If there is no further intervention, we will go to a vote on the amendment. Is that agreeable to everyone? Okay. Well then, we will proceed with the vote on the amendment tabled by Ms. Lalonde. Madam Clerk. I'm doing this in alphabetical order, Mr. Chong.
Monsieur Généreux. Monsieur Généreux.
I thought this was alphabetical.
Oui, excusez. Monsieur,
Yes, I'm sorry, Mr. Généreux. No.
Monsieur, excuse-moi, Monsieur Deltel.
Mr. Deltel. Mr. Godin. Mr. Beaulieu. Mr. Green. No. Mr. Arsenault. Ms. Lambropoulos? Yes. Ms. Romanado? Yes. Ms. Latanzio? Ms. Lalonde?
Monsieur President, yes.
Mr. Chairman? 6 noes.
L'amendement présent.
So the amendment put forward by Ms. Lalonde is defeated. So we will come back to the original motion. I saw 2 hands up rapidly. Ms. Latanzio, Ms. Lambropoulos, Mr. Godin. Ms. Latanzio, you have the floor.
With regards to the discussions that are being had here today, I think that fundamentally the common thread between all parties, all members around this table, is to determine whether or not we had the capacity to deliver the Canadian Student Services Grant in both official languages. This is what I retain from this discussion here, Mr. Chairman, today. So I'm going to propose that this be the amendment that we incorporate in my colleague Godin's main motion if we want. So, because I think that that's the undisputed, non-contradicted version of all the interventions that have been made. So I'm putting it out there on the floor. I'm suggesting that we incorporate that in the first paragraph as an amendment.
So, you mean that,
So that
an
this
amendment
committee-
to the...
So that this committee determine if we had the capacity to deliver the Canada Student Service Grant in both official languages across the country. That is what I'm putting on the floor as an amendment.
Est-ce que vous avez une copie?
Do you have a copy in both official languages? I only have it verbally, but I can send it to you.
Ouais.
Pour le bénéfice de...
So, for everyone's benefit, could you take the motion proposed and read us where your intervention would be found in that motion at the beginning? That the committee conduct a study on the decision? What do you want to put before that? That the committee conduct a study to see whether We Charity have the capacity to deliver the program as such in both official languages. Did We Charity have the capacity
To deliver the Canadian Student Grant Services in both official languages across the country? That this committee study that question. Yeah, undertake a study.
That the committee undertake a study on...
To determine if we had the capacity to deliver the Canadian Student Grant Services in both official languages across the country.
Et that paragraph gonna come on the top of that.
It would be the premise, yeah.
The
it would be,
premise.
yeah.
OK, comme ça.
Désolé. Mr. Chairman, it would go a little bit in what my colleague Généreux mentioned before in terms of opening it up, and that way would give the committee the breathing space to be able to do it with this amendment.
Juste une minute, là, si je veux juste...
Just a moment. I just want to complete this. Mr. Deltel. Okay, listen. What I'm proposing, given that we're in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, we rewrote the motion, the amendment that affects this motion. I want to read you this amendment, and if you want a copy, we'll have to stop so that everyone can get a copy. Otherwise, if you tell me that you agree to debate this amendment, we can proceed. I have it in English, and we have the interpretation services here, so here it reads as follows.
Undertake a study to determine if we has the capacity to deliver Canada Service Grant in both official languages across the country. And then after that, we have that the Minister of Economic Development and official languages. Le reste ne change pas. Donc je reprends.
So the rest doesn't change.
Undertake a study to determine if we has the capacity to deliver Canada Student Service Grant in both official languages across the country. Est-ce que c'est assez?
Is that clear enough for us, that amendment? Can we proceed this way and debate this amendment? Ms. Lambopoulos would like to read it in French, but go ahead if you wish. There's translation, but we have simultaneous interpretation. It's okay. So, listen. We can indeed debate this, but I have a request as well for a 5-minute pause, a break, a health break. Would you be agreeable to that? Because right now, let's continue. I'm going to the bathroom, Mr. Chairman. Put your mask on and go. We're going to debate this amendment. All right. Well, look. On this amendment, I had hands up. We had finished with Ms. Latanzio. I have Ms. Lambropoulos, Mr. Godin, Mr. Deltel. I wanted to say more or less the same thing. It's okay. All right. So, Mr. Godin. Mr. Chairman, I wanted to table an amendment, but I'll do it later. Mr. Deltel. Mr. Chairman, we're not here to put we on trial. We're here to know what the government did to come to this decision to give $912 million when the Liberals don't know whether we isn't bilingual enough or not. We knows because they went to get this PR firm to help them in Quebec. We are completely against our colleague's amendment. If someday the Liberals want to do a trial of we in a parliamentary committee, they can go ahead. Okay, Mr. Beaulieu and then Mr. Chong. Mr. Beaulieu, I would be against this because we's capacity to provide services is theoretical. What we want to know is, did the government take the necessary measures to ensure that services were fair and equitable for Francophones and Anglophones? Thank you, Mr. Beaulieu. Mr. Chong. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I cannot support this amendment because it's quite clear that We Charity does not have the capacity to deliver this program in both official languages. It's in their contract, but apparently they need support, a subcontract with another company, another organization.
The issue here isn't whether or not the We Charity had the capacity to deliver the program in the French language. It's clear they did not have that capacity. That's why they contracted with National. The issue here also is not whether or not the contract signed on June 23rd, backdated to May 5th, contained clauses that mandated the delivery of the program in both official languages. All federal contracts have those requirements as a basic standard. The issue here is the government's decision, and the amendment would eliminate those two words from the motion. The issue here is the government's decision. The government has said for weeks that the reason why the We organization got the contract was twofold. First, that it was recommended by the federal bureaucracy and that the Liberal cabinet ministers had nothing to do with it. And what's come to light in recent days, even yesterday, is that that's not the case, that Liberal cabinet ministers were heavily involved in helping We craft a second proposal to meet the requirements of delivering this program. And the second thing the government has maintained right from day one is that the We organization was the only organization in the country that could deliver this program. And that's also clearly not the case. And so the issue here is not the capacity of the We organization to deliver programs in both official languages. It's the disconnect between the Prime Minister's assertion that the We Charity is the only organization that could possibly have been able to deliver this program, and the fact that it couldn't, and it had to contract out the delivery of this program to some to a lobby group, the national lobby group that would deliver these services, part of these services, to 25% of Canadians whose first official language is French. And that's the issue here, and that's the reason why I cannot support this amendment. Thank you.
Merci. J'ai Madame.
Thank you, Mrs. Lambopoulos.
The motion so that it is no longer a lie, because it takes away the fact that there's no presence in Quebec when we've already stated that there is proof that there is a presence in Quebec. And it states that, again, it's an Anglophone organization. We know that it has delivered conferences in French prior to the pandemic, which means prior to any decisions being made, prior to hiring National. And not only that, but their website has been in French since 2017. This is an organization, maybe the chairperson of the organization is an Anglophone, but that doesn't mean that the organization does not provide services in French. It does. It is clear. Anybody can go look up the website. Anybody can look up their Facebook page and see clearly that We Montreal was solely in French. I'm not sure how much clearer it could be that as the motion was originally is just a lie, and we're basically assuming that they would not have been able to do it what we wanted them to do in both official languages. Before we even get to a motion like this, we have to study whether or not they would have been able to accomplish this goal. So I don't understand why we have a problem with the amendment when it just corrects the facts. It just makes it a motion that isn't a lie. It makes it so that we can study whether or not we had the capacity to deliver these services in both official languages.
Merci, Madame Lambropoulos.
Thank you. The debate is still open. I have no one on the list. Anyone else? So, we will vote on the amendment. This amendment tabled by Mrs. Latanzio. Madam Clerk, the vote on the amendment.
No.
Monsieur Deltel? Monsieur Généreux?
No.
Monsieur Godin?
No.
Monsieur Beaulieu? Monsieur Green?
No.
Monsieur Arsenault?
Oui.
Madame Romandel? Excuse me, Romandel. Okay, Madame Lalonde? Madame Lambropoulos?
Oui.
Et Madame Lantanzio?
Yes.
OK. 5 oui et 6 non.
Voilà.
This is the result of the vote. The amendment is not carried. Mr. Deltel, yes. We've been talking about this for a while. The amendment would be the following. I'm going to read the text. That the committee meet on an emergency basis to study the decision of the government to select a unilingual Anglophone organization to administer the Canada Student Service Grant, that the Minister of Economic Development and Official Languages, Mélanie Joly, be invited to appear for at least 2 hours before September the 4th, 2020. And the rest of the motion is the same. That the Minister of Diversity and Inclusion and Youth, the Honourable Bardish Chagger, the Leader of the Government in the House of Commons, the Honourable Pablo Rodriguez, the President of the Treasury Board, the Honourable Jean-Yves Duclos, National Public Relations, We Charity, and the Commissioner of Official Languages. The reason why we're proposing this is that, first of all, given what the other MPs are saying, we are taking out the reference to the unilingual Anglophone organization with no presence in Quebec, and so this will deal with your concerns and also the concern expressed by Mr. Beaulieu as to the date. So we are putting September the 4th and not August 21st, and we will give the chance for other ministers, such as Minister Rodriguez and Mr. Duclos, the opportunity to testify. Thank you, Mr. Deltel. Once again, given that we don't have a paper copy, and I want to make sure that all the members of the committee understand the amendment.
Écoutez,
While we are clarifying this amendment, we're going to take a quick 5-minute break. We're going to suspend for 5 minutes in order to clarify this motion. I think that there are several amendments that are combined. Thank you. Quick break. Before the break, we were having a discussion on the amendment moved by Mr. Delten. In order to clarify the situation, I would like to ask Mr. Delten to slowly read this amendment because we do not have a paper copy. Go ahead. Thank you. Thank you to colleagues. The motion reads as follows: that the committee have an emergency meeting in order to undertake a study of the government's decision to select We Charity to administer the Canada Student Service Grant. That the Minister of Economic Development and Official Languages, Mélanie Joly, be invited to appear for at least 2 hours between September the 1st and 11th, 2020. That the other witnesses include, but are not limited to, the Minister of Diversity and Inclusion of Youth, the Honourable Bardish Chagger. B, the Leader of the Government in the House of Commons, the Honourable Pablo Rodriguez. C, the President of the Treasury Board, the Honourable Jean-Yves Duclos. D, National Public Relations. E, We Charity. F, the Commissioner of Official Languages, Mr. Raymond Théberge. Thank you. So, my understanding is that there's been an amendment, and Madam Clerk, is this amendment in order? Yes. The amendment is in order. On the list, Mr. Green, and then Mrs. Lalonde. Thank you. Mrs. Lalonde, you have the floor. I just want, well, I spoke to you during the break, but I want to make sure. It's very difficult for me to accept dates. I think that people's availability, as we know, it's according to their availability. And if we limit ourselves to between September the 1st, it's a long weekend. It's a Labor Day weekend in Canada. So we do have that to deal with, and this will be September 4, 5, 6, and 7. That would be the Monday. So for me, I'm not sure about the date. Another thing I'd like to raise, and perhaps it's a sub-amendment to this amendment, that Madam Minister, with her officials. So you're referring here, and I'm visual, so sorry. You say that the Minister of Economic Development and Official Languages, Mélanie Joly, be invited to appear for at least 2 hours. I would like that the department officials be included. Department officials. If possible, I'd like the dates to be removed, but this is a sub-amendment that I'd like to move, Madam Clerk. So the Minister and her officials.
Voilà, donc.
Okay. So we have a sub-amendment now to this amendment. And we know the spirit of the amendment. Now we have this sub-amendment that essentially removes the dates and adds departmental officials that will accompany the minister. Debate on this sub-amendment. On the list, Mrs. Romanado. Mr. Beaulieu, I'm told that we're no longer on Parleview. We're not being broadcast on Parleview. I will check with the technician. We are no longer on Parleview. That's what I've been told. Yes, we are. We're back. Okay. Mr. Beaulieu. That's all. Earlier, we said we can't bring a sub-amendment on an amendment, and I'm not sure what the whole process is. Is it at the discretion of the chair? No, not at all. Of course not. I don't have that power. First of all, we had a motion, then we had an amendment, and there was a sub-amendment to the amendment that was brought. That is the procedure. I understand that, as the clerk is saying, I believe some people wanted to continue the debate on the amendment, but given that we have a sub-amendment, we have to deal with that first. We have to deal with the sub-amendment, and so the sub-amendment is to remove the dates and to add the minister and her officials. Mr. Deltel. Mr. Chair, two things. With regards to the date, I'd like to make a counter-proposal. Maybe we can find a middle ground. But the minister and her officials, the minister, as it is written, does allow for this without putting it. When we say that the other witnesses include, but without, but it's not limited to. So the door is open, and if they decide to have the officials appear, those who are responsible for official languages, it's altogether possible. We can speak with regards to dates, and I think that we can find a middle ground. Mrs. Lalonde, go ahead. Well, I very much appreciate this open door. The reason why you're referring to many lists already, well, I would like to make official that I want it to be stated that the officials will appear. If you look at the list, you do have a very complete list of people that you would like to appear. I understand what you're saying, but I understand what you're saying when it says witnesses but not limited to, but I want the minister to be accompanied by her departmental officials. Yes, let's, Mr. Deltel, I've never seen a minister appear alone. They're always surrounded by their officials. I don't even think we need to specify this. The door is open for that. Perhaps Madam Clerk could explain further. So I'm told that normally when a witness appears, or if the minister appears, she has the full right to be accompanied by departmental officials. Mr. Green?
Support the idea of having staff present, because I think that it provides the opportunity for us to have the same discussion at the same time, rather than have the minister defer to their staff at a future date, and then have their staff defer back to the minister at a future date. So I think it'd be wise to have them both at the same place. So I would support that.
Thank you very much. So, Mr. Deltel.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Alors...
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, listen, we're amendments, sub-amendments, okay. I'm not really sure where we are now, but I think that we can reach a consensus here with regards to the dates. If we put in September 2020, so this is a very broad period. Yes, there's Labor Day, but it's 4.5 weeks, and it allows us to set a date, a deadline. And so I think that if we put in September, that would be fine, and we can look at the minister's availability. Now, as for the officials, as the clerk was saying, normally when a minister appears, they are flanked by their departmental officials, and I think that we can reach our objectives. We have set aside anything anything that could lead to a debate. We understand that. Our objective here is to give these people the opportunity to appear and to explain what led to the decision. Okay. Mrs. Romanado. Thank you. And I'd like to thank my colleague. As chair of the Committee of Industry, I know that it's not easy to have the people appear when you would like them to, given everybody's busy schedule. So it's very appreciated to have a little bit of flexibility. The fact that it says urgent, well, it will be in September, not December, so I think that this gives you an opportunity to schedule, and I believe the clerk will appreciate as well. It's according to everybody's availability and also the members here around the table. I know that many people had to drive a couple of hours to come here today, so I would like to thank my colleague and thank you for his thank him for his flexibility. Thank you, Mrs. Romanado. You know, in this Official Languages Committee, there is wonderful cooperation, and this is why I would like to tell Mrs. Lalonde, and given that discussions were held with Mr. Deltel, first of all, Mrs. Lalonde would have to withdraw her sub-amendment, and then we would have to allow Mr. Deltel to review his amendment or to present it again with the changes discussed. Mrs. Lalonde, thank you. Thank you for explaining how this works. Yes, I am going to withdraw my sub-amendment. Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Lalonde. Mr. Deltel. Mr. Chair. Oh, we can always say that conversation. We call this a parliament, and it's because we have a lot of discussions. And so, yes, I think this will be good for everyone. So this would be the motion. Can I say this? Can I reread the motion? Wait. So now we're talking about the amendment to the motion. Yes. So we're understanding each other. I'm going to read it. That the committee have an emergency meeting to undertake a study of the government's decision to select We Charity to administer the Canada Student Service Grant. That the Minister of Economic Development and Official Languages, Honorable Mélanie Joly, be invited to appear for at least 2 hours in September 2020. That other witnesses include, but are not limited to, A, the Minister of Diversity and Inclusion and Youth, the Honorable Bardish Chagger. B, the Leader of the Government in the House of Commons, the Honorable Pablo Rodriguez. C, the President of the Treasury Board, the Honorable Jean-Yves Duclos. D, National Public Relations. E, We Charity. F, the Commissioner of Official Languages, Mr. Raymond Théberge. Mr. Beaulieu. So this is not a restrictive list. We can add to it. In the amendment, what I understand is it is indicated we are not limited to the list. Mrs. Latanzio, Mr. Chair, so can I understand that this list is not in order? People can appear in a different order. Is that correct? Yes. So there is flexibility there. This won't be the order of appearance. It can be a different order. Yes, of course. But I think, well, I think it depends. It's possible that the subcommittee will meet in order to set the agenda for the meeting of the committee. Anyone else on this amendment as presented by Mr. Deltel?
Donc nous sommes.
So we are ready to move on to voting on this amendment presented by Mr. Deltel. Over to you, Madam Clerk. Mr. Chong, Mr. Deltel, Mr. Généreux, Mr. Godin, Mr. Beaulieu, Mr. Green, Mr. Arsenault. Am I voting on an amendment or on the motion?
Okay.
On Mr. Deltel's amendment.
Madame Romanado?
Oui.
Okay. Madame Lalonde? Madame Lampopoulos?
Oui.
Et Madame Latanzio?
Yes.
All votes are yes. Unanimous.
Donc,
And there we have it. Mr. Deltel's amendment was unanimously adopted.
et donc, nous allons maintenant passer.
We will now then move on to the main motion included in the letter signed by the 4 members. As amended, of course, because we will have to adopt the motion as it is amended. And for speakers, we have first Mr. Godin. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to thank all colleagues on the committee. As my colleague Deltel said, we succeeded in finding common ground. It is a very honorable thing. And Mr. Arsenault has often said that this committee is almost always unanimous with almost a perfect score. And that is the case today. So bravo to all MPs from all political stripes. And now, Mr. Chair, I think that I have the right to withdraw my motion. Is that correct? Well, no, because what we're going to do is we're going to vote on the motion as amended. So we adopted the amendment, and now the next step would be to vote on the motion as amended. That is how we will move forward. Question inaudible. We will vote on it as amended. That is the procedure. So essentially, what Mr. Deltel just read would be the motion that we are going to use for upcoming sittings. Okay, so I have nothing to withdraw. This process is all in order, and thank you very much, Madam Clerk and Mr. Chair, for your cooperation. Thank you. Other interventions? In that case, as I said, we will vote on the motion as amended. An intervention from Mr. Généreux. Mr. Chair, would it be possible to find out if we can have witnesses come quickly? What is the timeline? Is it possible for us to propose dates and to have those witnesses appear quickly as possible in the circumstances?
Excusez-moi, voilà. Donc, avant de passer au vote, Monsieur Généreux.
Before we vote, Mr. Généreux, given the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, I would make the following suggestion. Our committee is here to ascertain what our wishes are, and afterwards, the clerk and myself and our team, we will find out what rooms are available with technicians and so forth, and then we will plan the schedule.
Monsieur Généreux.
Mr. Généreux, would it be possible to tell us? Would it be possible to let us know until what date we'll still be allowed to add witnesses to the list? Could you please repeat? Can the clerk let us know until what date we will be allowed to add names to the list of witnesses? Since the list of witnesses is not restrictive. Mr. Chair. Yes, what I would suggest would be for us to have a subcommittee meeting. And as we do normally, we could ask all members to submit the list of witnesses they want to have appear by a given date. And the clerk can make that date known. Ms. Romanato.
We just voted on the amendment, and now we will go back to the original motion. But it's not as amended because we've just voted on the motion.
Right.
On the amendment. So now we're going back to the original motion, which is no longer what we just voted on.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure that everyone is clear, and I would like you to reread what you're going to ask us to vote on so that it's very clear to everyone what we are actually voting on, because we've just made an agreement to an amendment, and now we're going back to the original motion, which is not the same.
Exactly. No. Mr. Chong.
We are going, Mr. Chair, thank you. We are going back. What is in front of the floor of this committee right now is the motion as amended.
Yeah.
So that is the motion as amended by Monsieur Daltel's amendment. Right. That is what's on the floor. When the debate collapses, we'll have the vote on that motion as amended.
Exactly. Thank you so much. So before taking the vote, I would like to ask either Mr. Godin or Mr. Deltel to read again that motion as amended, please. Comme ça, on va être clair.
And that way we'll all be clear on what we're voting on. Mr. Chair, the amended motion reads as follows: that the committee undertake a study of the government's decision to select We Charity, UNI, to administer the Canada Student Service Grant. That the Minister of Economic Development and Official Languages, Mélanie Joly, be invited to appear for at least 2 hours in September of 2020. That other witnesses include, but not be limited to, the Minister of Diversity and Inclusion and Youth, the Honourable Bardish Chagger, the Leader of the Government in the House of Commons, the Honourable Pablo Rodriguez, the President of the Treasury Board, the Honourable Jean-Yves Duclos, National Public Relations Firm, We Charity, UNI, the Commissioner of Official Languages, Mr. Raymond Théberge. Thank you very much, Mr. Godin. Next, the floor is yours, Mr. Arsenault. Before voting, I would like to say one thing. Usually, we don't predetermine the number of sittings for a given study. Secondly, I want to make a point about time. I know that we are in the COVID crisis now, and so the same rules don't necessarily apply. Usually we have to get unanimous consent to spend the committee's time. Maybe we can speak about how much time will be spent on this study. To me, that seems to be an important question that we should ask. Mr. Beaulieu. The beginning of the motion would stay the same. The original wording would stay the same. What Mr. Godin just read, that's all it is. That is everything. What Mr. Godin just read is the culmination of all the discussion that we have just undertaken. Anything else? Are there any other interventions on the motion as amended? We can then move on to the vote.
Monsieur Delquel? Monsieur Jeannot?
Oui.
Monsieur Godin?
Oui.
Monsieur Beaulieu?
Oui.
Monsieur Green?
Oui.
Monsieur Arsenault?
Non.
Madame Lalonde?
Non.
Madame Lampopoulos?
Non.
Madame Latencio? Et Madame Romanado?
Non.
5, non, 6.
Bon, eh bien alors, la motion.
And so the motion, as amended, was adopted. Does anyone else wish to intervene?
D'accord. Donc, excusez, deux petites choses. Oui.
First, two things. Yes, Mr. Arsenault. Firstly, the end date for witnesses. Can we agree on what that date is? Well, firstly, and together with the clerk, I would like to, well, I'll tell you two things. In the current context, I would like to table a motion myself that says that the chair be authorized to establish the calendar for the We Charity meetings.
Be authorized to set the schedule for the committee's meeting for the study of We Charity and schedule them as soon as possible. Mr. Green.
Certainly without casting any aspersions, but does that mean there's like an open date? Like, is it, if it's up to the will of the chair, could it be the case that members don't make themselves available until October?
Listen, Mr. Green, what I would like to, because it's not finished yet, but one of the proposals is we're going to look at the agenda, what is available, rooms, techniques, everything. And also, I think that we're going to have a subcommittee, a virtual subcommittee to discuss. It's not possible to have a virtual subcommittee because we have people, they're going to have to travel, but we're going to have to find ways to establish the agenda, but si je comprends bien, les membres veulent que ce soit.
But if I understand properly, members want for this to be finalized as soon as possible. And in the amended motion, we have the date set for the month of September. And so we will respect the committee's wishes. Mr. Arsenault, what about the date for inviting witnesses? As I said, today we can't really decide how much time, at what date exactly. We have to check on which rooms are available. There are so many steps to follow. But today we can finalize a date before which one representative from each political party send the list of witnesses that they wish to invite to the committee. And that way, at least we'll be able to organize the calendar of witnesses. Ms. Romanado, could we perhaps suggest a date before August 30th? That names be sent to the chair. That gives us about 2 weeks. Yes, we don't need to vote on that. We all agree. And so it will be before August 30th that we should all send a list of witnesses that you would like to invite to the committee. Then we can work with that list and establish the number of sittings. We can establish the number of witnesses who will be invited per sitting, and so on. And all this can be done as soon as possible. Mr. Godin, Mr. Chair, know that you have my full confidence and trust for holding our sittings. I think it would be good for us to establish something. As my colleague, Mr. Arsenault, said, we should establish the number of sittings, because here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 witnesses and a minimum of 3 sittings, and witnesses will be added to that list. Are we limiting ourselves? I think that we should agree on 4 sittings. 5 sittings? 4 meetings makes sense to me. We have a proposal of 4 meetings on the table. Does that suit everyone? Mr. Arsenault? One last thing. If everyone agrees, we can go ahead. Air Canada doesn't come to my riding anymore. I have to travel for 9 hours, so committees are difficult. And we do trust the chair and the clerk. That's not what I'm saying. But if we can't hold virtual meetings, Mr. Beaulieu, I was going to say, if it was virtual, then we could go ahead. The clerk is here, and the members are here to help you. And so, in summary, by August 30th, a representative from each political party should send a list of witnesses they wish to invite. And we will hold 4 sittings to study this motion. Mr. Arsenault, I'm going to reverse a bit. How does it work? Usually the meetings last 2 hours. Will these be 2, 3, 4-hour meetings? Do we need unanimous consent to decide? How does this work in the context of COVID?
Merci. Je comprends l'intervention.
I understand what my colleague said, but once again, I can't give you an answer. We need to look at availabilities, equipment, etc. But you will be informed as soon as possible of what the possible sitting dates will be. And on the other hand, we have to think about inviting the witnesses and ensuring that the witnesses are available. So all of those things are factors. And so please know that we are doing so in good faith. And on this, I adjourn our meeting, and I wish you all a safe travels. Thank you.